Request 1. Introduction to requests. Have you ever wondered what happens after you click a submit button on a web page? For instance, if you are submitting information, where does the information go? How is the information processed? The answer to the previous questions revolves around HTTP requests. There are many types of HTTP requests. The four most commonly used types of HTTP requests are GET, POST, PUT, and DELETE. In this lesson, we'll cover GET and POST requests. If you want to learn more about the different HTTP requests, we recommend the following documentation: the Mozilla Developer Network HTTP methods. With a GET request, we're retrieving or getting information from some source, usually a website. For a POST request, we're posting information to a source that will process the information and send it back. In this lesson, we will explain how to make GET and POST requests by using JavaScript's XHR object. We'll also incorporate query strings into our requests. We'll use the DataMuse API for GET requests and the Rebrandly URL shortener API for POST requests. To complete the exercise on POST, make sure you create a Rebrandly API key by following the instructions in the article below. Codecademy articles Rebrandly URL shortener API. Okay. Instructions. Click on the button on the main page to see what the code in main.js does. Let's see that first. And it's bringing something back. It's a name, username, phone. So this looks like a user of our website here. You'll see JSON being displayed on the page. JSON, JavaScript object notation, will be the format in which our data is sent to us. That button you click produced a GET request. That's right, you've just made a GET request. Go to the next exercise to learn more about requests. Let's move on to the next lesson. We'll grab our API in just a bit. I've already clicked on it and looked at the process, and I want to go ahead and show you how to do that when we need it. HTTP requests. One of JavaScript's greatest assets is its non-blocking properties, or that it is an asynchronous language. Websites like newspaper websites take advantage of these non-blocking properties to provide a better user experience. Generally, a site's code is written so that users don't have to wait for a giant image to load before being allowed to read the actual article. Rather, that text is rendered first, and then the image can load in the background. JavaScript uses an event loop to handle asynchronous function calls. When a program is run, function calls are made and added to the stack. The functions that make requests that need to wait for servers to respond then get sent to a separate queue. Once the stack has cleared, then the functions in the queue are executed. Web developers use the event loop to create a smooth browsing experience by deciding when to call functions and how to handle asynchronous events. We'll be exploring one system of technologies called asynchronous JavaScript and XML, or AJAX. To read more about the event loop, read the MDN documentation for the event loop. Instructions. 1. To get a glimpse of how the event loop works, take a look at the code in the code editor. We'll be using setTimeout, which will pass a function call to the queue. The first argument is a callback, and the second argument is the number of milliseconds the program must wait before the callback can be run. The other console.log calls are run from the stack. I guess we'll just press run here. Okay, first message, second message. This message will always be run last. So right here, at the set timeout, that message is always run last because it's set to come back in 2.5 seconds. Interesting, right? What if we change the 2500 in set timeout to be 0? Essentially, the callback doesn't need to wait before it can be called. Do you think that this change will affect the order? Let's do that for them. So now that's 0, run it, and this message will always run last. Let's go to the next lesson. Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, AJAX, enables requests to be made after the initial page load. Initially, AJAX was used only for XML formatted data. Now it can be used to make requests that have many different formats: MDN documentation, extensible markup language, XML. Similarly, the XML HTTP request XHR API, named for XML, can be used to make many kinds of requests and supports other forms of data. Remember, we use GET to retrieve data from a source. Take a look at the boilerplate code in the diagram to see how to make an XHR GET request. We'll construct this template from scratch in a different exercise and walk through what each step does. So here is our XML HTTP request GET. Const XHR equals new XML HTTP request invoked. That creates a new request object. That, imagine it says creates new object. Const URL equals an HTTP to some endpoint. XHR.responseType equals JSON as a string. XHR.onReadyStateChange is a fat arrow function, and inside the body is an if statement that says XHR.ReadyState triple equal to XML HTTP request.done. In the body of the if is the code to execute with response, and then that XHR.onReadyStateChange function closes. XHR.open takes get, comma, URL. XHR.send invoked. Instructions move on to the next exercise when you're ready. Let's move on to the next lesson. XHR GET Requests 2. We are going to construct XHR GET Request boilerplate code step by step until we have written a complete GET request. Feel free to refer to the XHR GET diagram at any point while completing this exercise. XHR GET diagram. Instructions. First, we need to create the XML HTTP request object using the new operator. Save this object in a const called XHR. Okay, const XHR equals new XML H and then TTP, then capital R in request. Note, while the code will work regardless of how you name your variables, it is a common practice to name this object XHR. All right, let's run this first one. Looks good. Number 2. Next, save the following URL to a const called URL. Let's make that const first. Make sure the URL is wrapped in quotes so that it's a string. Okay, so we want to put this in, and we want it wrapped in quotes as a string. Let's run that. Number 3. Set the response type property of the XHR object to equal JSON as a string. JSON is JavaScript object notation, which is how the response is going to be formatted. Okay, so we're going to say XHR.responseType, and that will equal JSON as a string. JSON. Let's run that. Great, we'll go to number 4. Set the XHR.onReadyStateChange event handler equal to an anonymous arrow function. Leave the function empty. Okay, so XHR.onReadyStateChange, and this is not camel case at all. And they want us to set this equal to an empty function, okay? Let's see if that's what they wanted. That is it. Number 5. In the code block of the function you created in the previous step, add this conditional statement. If, we could copy this right in. Okay, so this is the if statement. We saw this in the diagram. If XHR.ReadyState is triple equal to XML HTTP request.done, then we do what we want to do inside of this function. So we'll paste that into the body of that function. The purpose of this conditional statement checks to see if the request has finished. Let's run that. Number 6. In the code block of the conditional statement, return the response property of XHR. We will return the response property of XHR, XHR.response, like so. And let's see if that's right. There we go. Number 7. Below the function you created in the previous 2 steps, call the .open method on the XHR object and pass it get and URL as arguments. Okay, let's do that. And where is this going to happen? Below the function we created. So I'll imagine below this one. No, it should be below this one. All right, let's try that right here. So XHR.open. And we're putting in there a string of get, and we will comma to the URL that we made right up here. .open creates a new request, and the arguments passed in determine the type and URL of the request. Let's try this out, see if we did it right. Perfect. Let's go down to number 8. On the following line, call the .send method on the XHR object. Do not pass it any arguments. Okay. XHR.send and invoke that, and we will press run. That's working. Nice work. You've written the boilerplate code for an AJAX GET request using an XML HTTP request object. Let's go to the next lesson. XHR GET Requests 3. By this point, you have an idea of how to write the boilerplate code for an AJAX request using an XHR object. In this exercise, you will incorporate that boilerplate code to make a GET request to the DataMuse API to search for words that rhyme. DataMuse API documentation. Instructions. 1. At the top of main.js, create a const named URL and save to it the following URL as a string. HTTP, okay, so that's the DataMuse URL. We'll make a const URL will equal, and then we will get the DataMuse URL, and remember to make it a string. You'll be using this URL to direct your request. Let's run that. That's good. Number 2. Underneath const URL, create another const named query params and assign it to rel_ri equal. Rel_ri equal is the start of a parameter for the query string. This parameter will narrow your search to words that rhyme. Okay, so we will make a new const. It's called query params. It's going to equal rel_rhy equals, and that's supposed to give us words that rhyme. And we'll run that. Oh, I spelled const wrong. That's definitely not going to work. Here we go. Cool. Number 3. In the function getSuggestions, create a const named wordQuery and assign it to be inputField.value. InputField.value grabs what is in the input field and assigns it to the variable wordQuery. You'll be working in getSuggestions for the rest of the exercise. All right, we'll go to getSuggestions right here, and we want to make a const named wordQuery. Assign it to inputField.value. Let's try that out here. And it works, great. Let's go to number 4. Now create another const named endpoint and assign equal to a string that concatenates URL, query params, and word query. Endpoint will store the value of the entire URL and query string. Okay, so inside of here, we're going to make a const called endpoint. Const endpoint. It equals a concatenation, so let's use our backticks for that. We will say $, and open and close curly braces. The first thing I'll put in there is the first thing they asked for, which was URL. Then we'll do the same thing again. query params. And one more time, word query. And let's run that, see if we did it right. That works. Let's go to number 5. You can now start on the XML HTTP request object. Declare a const named XHR and use the new operator to create the XML HTTP request object. Okay, const XHR is going to equal a new XML HTTP request. Okay, let's run that. Number 6, set the response type of XHR to JSON. Okay, so XHR.response type, camel case, equals a string with JSON in it, all undercase. When data is sent back, it will be in JSON format. We'll run that. Great. Number 7, assign an anonymous arrow function to the onReadyStateChange event handler of XHR. Okay. XHR.onReadyStateChange, and there's no capitals in that. And here we go with our anonymous function. Let's run that. Number 8, include the following code inside the code block of the anonymous arrow function you just created. And then it's the if xhr.readystate. It's exactly what we did last time, except it says render raw response, and it's going to take in the xhr.response, and I imagine that has something to do with what gets on the screen here. So I'm just going to copy this in. It's our entire if statement there. The render raw response helper function can be viewed at public and then helper functions.js. Let's take a look and see what it does. We have nothing rendered yet. Number 9, below the anonymous arrow function you just created, but still inside of getSuggestions, call the .open method on the XHR object and pass it get and endpoint as respective arguments. Let's do that first because there's quite a bit more to read here, but they just gave us something we need to get done. So outside of the onReadyStateChange, after that will be xhr.open, and in there they wanted us to put get all capital and as a string, and the next thing they wanted was endpoint, and that's what we constructed before by concatenating the URL query params and word query. This method call will create a new request using the 2 arguments. Get sets the method and URL sets the destination. Underneath .open, call the .send method on XHR and pass it no arguments. The .send method will send the request to the server. Okay, xhr.send, and we'll invoke it. Then run your code. Okay, we'll run it. It's working. Type in a word in the input field and click the submit button. If all went well, the response field in the browser will display the raw response from the API. So type in a word. Let's do enter. There we are. We see this says these are words are objects here, and they actually have scores with how much they rhyme, I guess. They have a num syllables, they have a score, and they have the word. Cool, very cool. Let's go down to number 10. Now delete render raw response xhr.response and replace it with render response xhr.response and run your code again. Okay, I'm just going to copy this so I don't make any typos. So that was on render raw response. Where was that? Right here. Oh, I actually only need the word. Okay. And run your code. Let's run our code. And then we'll do the same thing here just to see what it looks like. There you go. Yeah, so they're just taking the words and they're, I guess, probably weighted, whoever has the highest score is most likely on top. That's what I'm going to guess, because this isn't in ABC order. Then type a word into the input field and click the submit button. Yeah, okay, we did that. Great, now it looks nice and formatted. Well, okay, let's go to the next lesson. XHR GET Requests 4. In the previous exercise, you made a GET request to the DataMuse API to find words that rhyme. In this exercise, we will create a request to set a topic and find adjectives that describe the input word using query strings. A query string contains additional information to be sent with a request. The DataMuse API allows us to retrieve more specific data with query strings attached to the request URL. Wiki query string. A query string is separated from the URL using a question mark character. After a question mark, you can then create a parameter, which is a key value pair joined by an equal sign. Examine the example below. HTTP, and let's get to where the question mark is. Okay, so after .com/words key equals value. If you want to add an additional parameter, you will have to use the question mark character to separate your parameters, like so. And now we have .com/words key equals value, and another key equals another value. Let's incorporate this into our code. Instructions. 1. Let's do something else besides finding words that rhyme. Have const query params store the value rel_jjb equals. This will search for words that describe another word. All right, so query params are up here, and we're going to change it to this. Run the code, then type in a word and click the submit button on the page. Okay, let's run it. That's right. We'll go with enter again. Oh, did we need to type in a topic too? All right, let's just see the enter one. Control, prompt, click, shift, hit, alt, select. Okay, those are words related to enter. 2. Since we want to retrieve more specific results, we should create another parameter. Create another const additional params underneath query params and assign it and topics equal. All right, const, and it was additional params, and that's going to be equaled to end topics. So that's the ampersand and then topics, and then the equal sign. Reminder, the ampersand character at the start of the string is used to separate our parameters. The equal character will join the key topics to a value. Let's run this. Looks good, number 3. Now, if you were wondering why there's a second input field, that's exactly what we're going to hook up now. The word typed in here will be the value portion of our second parameter. The second parameter will filter the response using the word typed into the second input field. In the next step, we'll incorporate this parameter in our query string. In the code block of getSuggestions, under word query, declare a const topic query and assign it to the value of the topic field. Okay, so we want, it was under word query. Okay, so here, const topic query, and that needs to be the response of the input field. No, the topic field. Okay, good, because that's the input field. So topic field dot value. Let's see if that's right. Great. Number 4. In getSuggestions, change the value of endpoint to a concatenated string of URL, query params, word query, additional params, and topic query. Okay, so that's our endpoint right here. URL, query params, word query, and the next is going to be topic query. Okay, so $, open, close, put topic query inside of there. Run the code and enter a word and a topic and click Submit. Did you set const endpoint equal to a concatenated string? First it's URL, then it's query params, then it's word query. Oh, I didn't put additional params. That's my fault. Okay, additional params. That goes in between here. Now we'll run that. Okay, and we want to type in a word. We'll do enter again, and the topic is doors, and we'll submit that. Rear, handle, input, stop, control, touch, line. Okay, our request will have returned a response of adjectives that are related to a topic. Feel free to play around with variables and parameters to get more word suggestions. All right, we can go to the next lesson. Let's go. XHR POST Requests 1. Reminder, if you haven't already signed up for an API key from Rebrandly, please read this Rebrandly sign-up guide. Okay, so you can go to this Rebrandly sign-up guide now. Where you need to go is a Rebrandly site to create a new account. I already have an account. So I'll go to the Rebrandly site, but they will load me right in. Now, when you create a new account, you'll come to here, and I have several different links here that I've tested out, and I'm going to make a new link when we get to it, and I'll show you how to do it in here when we do get to it. I can get rid of this for now. So yeah, just sign up for your account, and we will work with it in just a moment. Great. By this point, you've signed up for an API key, and you know the essence of making a GET request. We will be making a POST request using the Rebrandly API. The major difference between a GET request and a POST request is that a POST request requires additional information to be sent through the request. This additional information is sent in the body of the POST request. We'll walk through the code from the diagram and construct our own POST request in the next lesson. Instructions. Move on to the next exercise when you're ready. Go to that next exercise now. XHR POST Requests 2. We are going to reconstruct the code from the previous exercise step by step until we have written a complete AJAX POST request. Feel free to refer to the XHR POST diagram at any point while completing this exercise. Instructions: create a new XML HTTP request object using the new operator, and save it in a const called XHR. Okay, so let's get that started. Const was XHR equals new XML HTTP request. The XML HTTP request object is used in JavaScript to interact with servers. Let's run that, see if we're right. We are. Number 2. Next, save the following URL to a const called URL. Make sure the URL is wrapped in quotes so that it is a string. So HTTP, okay, so this is the URL they want us to wrap in quotes and assign to a const called URL. The URL will direct the request to the correct server. So const URL equals this as a string, and we can run. Create a new const called data and save this line of code to it. It's a JSON stringify ID to 100. Okay, so let's make a const called data will equal that. JSON.stringify will convert a value to a JSON string. By converting the value to a string, we can then send the data to a server. All right, let's run that, see if we're right. There we go. Number 4, set the response type property of the XHR object to be JSON. So, oh, not const, sorry about that. XHR.response type. That's going to equal a string with JSON in it. And let's run that. Perfect. Number 5. Set the XHR.onReadyStateChange event handler equal to an anonymous arrow function. Leave the function empty until the next step. Okay, I'm going to just copy that from myself. XHR.onReadyStateChange is an anonymous arrow function. And .onReadyStateChange will contain the event handler that will be called when XHR's state changes. So let's run that. Number 6. In the code block of the function you created in the previous step, add a conditional statement that checks to see if the ready state of XHR is equal to XML HTTP request .done. Okay, so we're going to write that whole conditional out. If the ready state of XHR dot ready state, camel case, triple equal to this is capital, XML HTTP request, R is capital, dot done, all capital for done. And it doesn't say to do anything in the body of that if, so we'll just run that. Great. Number 7. In the code block of the conditional statement, return the response property of XHR. The response property will contain the data that we're getting back from the POST request. Okay, so return XHR.response. And we could run that. Great. Number 8. Below the function you created in the previous 2 steps, call the .open method on the XHR object and pass it post and URL as arguments. And we were doing get before, so this is where we're going to pass post. So below the function we just created, which ends right there, it's going to be XHR.open, and we're going to hand it all capitals for a string of post and the URL that we made up here. .open creates a new request, and the arguments passed in determine what type of request is being made and where it's being made to. So let's run that. Great. Number 9. On the following line, call the .send method on the XHR object and pass data as an argument. Okay. XHR.send, and we're passing data. .send will send the request to the server. Nice work. You've written the boilerplate code for an AJAX POST request using an XML HTTP request object. Let's run that, make sure it's right. It is, and we can move on to the next lesson. XHR POST Requests 3. Reminder, if you haven't already signed up for an API key from Rebrandly, please read this article. We're going to get our API key now, so just go to your Rebrandly dashboard, head over to the little icon that's you, and go to API keys. And you can generate yourself an API key. In this exercise, you'll be making a POST request to the Rebrandly API to shorten a URL. Get ready, you're now going to incorporate the previous lesson's boilerplate code into making an actual POST request. If you reset the exercise at any point, you will have to paste your API key again at the top. Instructions. 1. Copy your Rebrandly API key and assign it to the const API key at the top of your code. All right, I'm going to put mine in here. I will delete this immediately so nothing funny happens with it, but that's where your API key should go, and it looks like it should be going as a string, I'm imagining, because they didn't say to get rid of the string portion. Let me see. Yeah, I imagine it's a string. Let's try that out. We'll run it. Number 2. Within the code block of shorten URL, create a const called URL to shorten and save input field.value to it. Okay, so we're gonna have a const called URL to shorten inside shorten URL. Where are you? Right here. Const URL to shorten is going to equal input field.value. Note, for the remainder of this exercise's instructions, we will be working inside the code block of shorten URL. All right, let's run that then. Nope, I did that wrong. Declare a const URL to a shorten. Spelled input field wrong. That's most likely the issue. Good. Number 3. Create a const called data and save the following code to it. Okay, a const called data inside of shorten URL. That's going to equal this JSON stringify. We're including this information because the API expects to see an object with a key destination that has a value of a URL. Let's run that. Great, let's go to number 4. Create a new XML HTTP request object using the new operator and save it to a const called XHR. Okay. Const XHR is going to equal XML HTTP request. And we have to use the new operator like that. Then we could cut it off and run. Number 5, set the response type property of the XHR object to be JSON. Okay, XHR.response type equals JSON. Let's run that. We got it. Let's go to number 6. Save an empty anonymous arrow function to the onReadyStateChange event handler of the XHR object. This function will not take in any parameters. Okay. XHR.onReadyStateChange and just a fat arrow function. Inside the anonymous function's code block, include the following code inside of its code block. That's a funny sentence, but we can just grab this and paste it in. The render raw response function can be viewed at public/helper functions. All right, let's run this, see if we did that properly. We did. Number 7. Below the anonymous function you just created, call the .open method on XHR and pass it post and URL as respective arguments. So below that function, which ends right here, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of something called Axios. XHR.open, and inside of there, post, comma, URL. Let's run that. That's right, number 8. To access the Rebrandly API, we need a header with 2 key value pairs. In the header, you must include values for content type and an API key. To set the header, we have to include the following code below our .open method. XHR.set request header, and instead of there we actually pass content type comma application JSON as a string, and then we do the same set request header on the XHR object again with API key as a string and API key. That's actually what we wrote at the top here. This here being passed in as well. So let's get started on that. That's going to be all of this. So we're actually going to just paste it in. We could see there's our content type and we're saying application JSON. We could also see we said we're going to set our API key and then we give the value of the API key that we saved up on top. So let's run that, see if it's right. Perfect. Number 9. On XHR, call the .send method and pass it data as the argument. Okay. XHR.send with data as the argument. Let's run that. Number 10. Enter this URL into the input field and click the shorten button on the web page. Okay, there's a big URL here. We're going to copy it. We're going to paste it in. We're going to hit the shorten button. And we have a whole bunch of JSON that came back there. Notice the object that came back. Now replace render raw response with render response. Let's do that. Now render raw response, where were you? Right here. Render response. We will run it, which passes, and then we want to paste that URL in again. Okay. Your shortened URL is rebrownlee.ly, and there is the shortened URL. Great, let's move to the next lesson. Review requests 1. You've done an amazing job navigating through making XHR GET and POST requests. Take some time to review the core concepts before moving on to the next lesson. 1. JavaScript is the language of the web because of its asynchronous capabilities. AJAX, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, is a set of tools that are used together to take advantage of JavaScript's asynchronous capabilities. 2. There are many HTTP request methods, 2 of which are GET and POST. GET requests only request information from other sources. POST methods can introduce new information to other sources in addition to requesting it. GET requests can be written using an XML HTTP request object and vanilla JavaScript. POST requests can be written using an XML HTTP object and vanilla JavaScript. Writing GET and POST requests with XHR objects and vanilla JavaScript requires constructing the XHR object using new, setting the response type, creating a function that will handle the response object, and opening and sending the request. To add a query string to a URL endpoint, you can use ? and include a parameter. To provide additional parameters, use an ampersand, and then include a key-value pair joined by an equal sign. Determining how to correctly write the request and how to properly implement them requires carefully reading the documentation of the API with which you're working. Instructions. Play around with the browser and code to make GET and POST request. If you're going to make POST request, make sure you assign API key your rebrandlee API key and run the code. If you want to challenge yourself, and you can go ahead and try to do a little bit more here if you'd like to have some more fun with these types of requests. There's a fetch API built into JavaScript now that's more modern than this, and I imagine that's what's next. Actually, let's see what's up next. It's request 2. And yep, there is our await fetch. So we're going to learn fetch next, and that's going to come in extra handy. It's one of the tools that's built into JavaScript now.